They chose to leave you, but there's something they didn't know when they made that decision. Marcus Aurelius discovered 2,000 years ago that when you stop chasing those who abandon you, something extraordinary happens. You awaken a desperate desire in them that's impossible to ignore. This ancient wisdom will show you exactly why conscious indifference is the most powerful weapon you possess, and how using it will transform not just how they see you, but most importantly, how you see yourself. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment from what part of the world you're watching, because now I'm going to tell you everything. Have you ever wondered what makes a truly good person in the eyes of ancient philosophers? While modern society often measures success in terms of wealth or status, the Stoics of ancient Greece and Rome had a different metric entirely. They believed that a life well lived wasn't about what you owned or achieved, but about the virtues you embodied in your character. The Stoic philosophy emerged around 300 BCE in Athens, founded by Zeno of Citium, but later flourished in Rome with prominent figures like Seneca, Epictetus, and Emperor Marcus Aurelius. At the heart of Stoic ethical teaching lie four cardinal virtues: wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. These four qualities weren't just nice-to-have character traits. They represented the essential elements of a flourishing human life, according to Stoic thought. Let's begin with wisdom, or phronesis, as the ancient Greeks called it. Stoic wisdom isn't about knowing lots of facts or having advanced degrees. Instead, it's practical wisdom, the knowledge of what is good, bad, or indifferent in life, and the ability to make sound judgments based on that knowledge. The wise person can distinguish between what truly matters, virtue, and what ultimately doesn't, external circumstances like wealth, health, or reputation. Think about a simple example from everyday life. When faced with criticism, a person lacking wisdom might immediately react with anger or defensiveness, taking the criticism as a personal attack on their worth. The wise person, however, pauses to evaluate. Is there truth in this criticism that can help me improve? If yes, I should be grateful for the feedback. If not, why let it disturb my peace of mind? Wisdom allows us to see situations clearly, without the distortion of irrational judgments. In our modern context, wisdom might manifest as digital minimalism in a world of information overload, knowing which information deserves our attention and which is merely distraction. It's about developing good judgment about where to invest our limited time and energy. Wisdom helps us recognize that scrolling social media for 3 hours probably isn't contributing to our well-being, while spending time developing meaningful relationships likely is. The second cardinal virtue is courage, or andreia. Stoic courage goes far beyond physical bravery in dangerous situations. It represents moral fortitude, the strength to face life's challenges with dignity and perseverance. It's the ability to do what is right even when difficult, uncomfortable, or frightening. Courage means standing by your principles when facing pressure to compromise them. Epictetus, who began life as a slave before becoming a respected philosopher, embodied this virtue. Despite physical disability and societal constraints, he maintained his dignity and taught others to do the same. Courage for the Stoics wasn't about fearlessness. It was about acting rightly, despite fear. In contemporary life, courage might look like speaking an uncomfortable truth when silence would be easier, leaving a secure but unfulfilling job to pursue meaningful work, or facing a serious illness with equanimity. It's about making difficult choices aligned with your values rather than taking the path of least resistance. The third cardinal virtue is justice, or dikaiosune. For Stoics, justice extended well beyond legal compliance or punishing wrongdoing. It encompassed treating others fairly, fulfilling our social duties, and recognizing our obligations to the human community. Marcus Aurelius, despite being Roman emperor, constantly reminded himself of his duty to serve others, writing in his meditations that we were born to work together like feet, hands and eyes. Justice recognizes our fundamentally social nature as humans. It acknowledges that we don't exist in isolation, but are parts of families, communities, and societies with responsibilities toward others. The just person understands that their actions affect others and behaves accordingly. In modern applications, justice might involve examining our consumption habits and their impact on workers and the environment, treating colleagues and service workers with respect and fairness, or participating in civic life rather than withdrawing from it. Justice reminds us that personal virtue cannot be separated from how we treat others. The fourth cardinal virtue is temperance, or sophrosin. This virtue involves moderation in all things and the ability to control destructive emotions and desires. It doesn't mean suppressing all emotions, contrary to popular misconceptions about Stoicism, but rather developing appropriate emotional responses guided by reason. Temperance helps us avoid excess and find the middle path between too much and too little. Seneca, who served as advisor to Emperor Nero, wrote extensively about temperance, particularly regarding wealth and anger. Despite his own considerable wealth, he advocated simple living and regular practices of voluntary discomfort to avoid becoming enslaved to luxury. He also developed techniques for managing anger, recognizing its destructive potential. In our consumer society, temperance has particular relevance. It might manifest as mindful consumption rather than impulsive shopping, moderate use of technology rather than addiction to screens, or developing healthy eating habits rather than oscillating between indulgence and deprivation. Temperance helps us find balance in a world that often pushes us toward extremes. What makes these four virtues particularly interesting is their interconnected nature. The Stoics didn't see them as isolated traits, but as different aspects of a unified character. You can't truly possess one virtue without the others. Wisdom without courage might lead to knowing what's right, but lacking the fortitude to act on it. Courage without wisdom might lead to reckless action. Justice without temperance might lead to excessive harshness, while temperance without justice might lead to self-centered moderation that ignores others' needs. This interconnection creates what the Stoics called the unity of virtues. Virtues work together, reinforce each other, and ultimately form a coherent character. Someone who embodies all four virtues achieves what the Stoics considered the ultimate goal: living in accordance with nature and reason. These ancient ideas have remarkable staying power. In recent years, Stoicism has experienced a significant revival, with business leaders, athletes, military personnel, and ordinary people finding value in its practical wisdom. The cardinal virtues provide a framework for character development that transcends cultural and historical boundaries. Modern psychological research supports many Stoic insights. Studies in positive psychology have found that cultivating virtues like wisdom, courage, and temperance contribute significantly to well-being and resilience. Cognitive behavioral therapy, one of the most empirically supported forms of psychotherapy, draws heavily from Stoic principles about how our judgments shape our emotions. The four cardinal virtues also offer a refreshing alternative to the contemporary focus on achievement and acquisition. Rather than asking, "What should I have?" or "What should I accomplish?" the Stoic virtues prompt us to ask, "What kind of person should I be?" This shift in focus can be liberating in a culture that often measures worth by external metrics. Practicing these virtues doesn't require dramatic life changes. Small, daily actions build virtuous habits over time. We develop wisdom through reflection and learning from experience. We build courage by taking small risks and gradually facing bigger challenges. We cultivate justice through fair dealings with others and community involvement. We strengthen temperance through mindful consumption and emotional awareness. The ancient Stoics would remind us that virtue is its own reward, that living according to these four cardinal virtues constitutes a good life regardless of external circumstances. Whether we're facing prosperity or adversity, health or illness, social recognition or obscurity, we always retain the capacity to embody wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. In an unpredictable world where so much lies beyond our control, the Stoic virtues offer something stable to hold on to, a way of navigating life's complexities with dignity and purpose. They remind us that while we can't control what happens to us, we always retain some control over who we become. Perhaps that's why, more than 2,000 years after they were first articulated, these four cardinal virtues continue to resonate with people seeking to live well in challenging times. Now that we understand the four cardinal virtues that form the foundation of Stoic ethics, we might wonder how exactly we're supposed to apply these principles in our everyday lives. After all, it's one thing to understand what wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance mean in theory, but quite another to practice them when facing life's challenges. This is where another core Stoic teaching becomes incredibly valuable: the dichotomy of control. If you've ever felt frustrated about things beyond your influence or wasted energy worrying about outcomes you couldn't determine, you're not alone. The ancient Stoics recognized this common human struggle and developed a practical framework to address it. This principle, most clearly articulated by the Stoic philosopher Epictetus, helps us understand what's within our power and what isn't, a distinction that can dramatically reduce unnecessary suffering. Epictetus, who lived from approximately 55 to 135 CE, began his life as a slave before gaining his freedom and becoming a respected philosopher. Perhaps because of his difficult early experiences, Epictetus was particularly concerned with identifying sources of true freedom even in constraining circumstances. In the opening lines of his handbook, or Enchiridion, he presents what many consider the most fundamental principle of Stoic practice. Some things are within our control, and some things are not within our control. What exactly did Epictetus mean by this? According to Stoic philosophy, the things within our control are primarily internal: our judgments, impulses, desires, aversions, and mental faculties. In modern terms, we might say our thoughts, attitudes, intentions, and efforts fall squarely within our domain of influence. These are aspects of ourselves that no external force can ultimately control unless we allow it. On the other hand, things not within our control are external: our health, wealth, reputation, status, and especially other people's opinions and actions. Even outcomes of our own efforts often contain elements beyond our complete control. A business might fail despite your best planning, a relationship might end despite your sincere efforts, or illness might strike despite healthy habits. The Stoic approach isn't about passive resignation to whatever happens. Rather, it's about clear-eyed recognition of the boundaries of our control so we can focus our energy where it's most effective. Think about a job interview. You can control your preparation, your presentation, and your attitude, but you can't control whether the interviewer had a bad morning, whether another candidate has connections, or whether the company suddenly implements a hiring freeze. When we mistakenly believe we can control external outcomes, we set ourselves up for frustration, anxiety, and disappointment. We might obsess over getting a specific job, making someone love us, or ensuring our social media posts receive a certain number of likes. The Stoics would point out that these efforts are ultimately misdirected because the final results depend on factors outside our influence. What makes this dichotomy so practical is how it redirects our attention and energy. Instead of fixating on outcomes, we focus on our own actions and attitudes, the things we genuinely can control. This shift doesn't mean abandoning goals or not caring about results. It means understanding that the only guaranteed domain of influence we have is our own choices and responses. Epictetus uses a powerful metaphor to illustrate this point. He suggests we approach life like a sailor. A good sailor doesn't pray for specific winds, but rather develops the skill to work with whatever winds arise. Similarly, we shouldn't demand that events conform to our wishes, but instead cultivate the ability to respond virtuously to whatever circumstances we encounter. This distinction between what is up to us and not up to us intersects meaningfully with the cardinal virtues we discussed earlier. Wisdom allows us to recognize this boundary accurately. Courage helps us face external events we can't control without being overwhelmed. Justice guides how we interact with others while respecting their autonomy. Temperance helps us moderate desires for things beyond our control. In daily practice, applying the dichotomy of control might look something like this. When facing a challenging project at work, you focus on bringing your best effort, creativity, and thoroughness, all within your control, rather than anxiously fixating on how your boss will receive it or whether it will lead to a promotion. When in a disagreement with a partner or friend, you concentrate on communicating clearly and kindly within your control, rather than trying to force them to agree with your perspective, which isn't. One common misunderstanding about the dichotomy of control is that it promotes passivity or resignation. Critics sometimes argue that Stoics simply accept whatever happens without trying to change anything. This interpretation misses the active dimension of Stoic practice. The Stoics weren't advocating withdrawal from life's challenges, but rather strategic engagement with them. When facing injustice or hardship, the Stoic doesn't simply shrug and walk away. Instead, they assess what aspects of the situation they can influence through virtuous action, focus their energy there, and accept with equanimity what remains beyond their control. Marcus Aurelius, despite being Roman emperor with enormous power, still recognized the limits of his control and wrote extensively about accepting these boundaries. Modern psychology has largely validated the wisdom of this approach. Cognitive behavioral therapy, developed in the 20th century, draws heavily from Stoic principles. CBT helps people identify irrational thought patterns, including what psychologists call control fallacies, the tendency to overestimate or underestimate our influence over external events. Research shows that people who can accurately distinguish between what they can and cannot control tend to experience less anxiety, depression, and stress. The dichotomy of control proves especially valuable during times of crisis or uncertainty. During the recent global pandemic, for instance, many people found Stoic principles helpful for navigating unprecedented challenges. We couldn't control the existence of the virus, government responses, or others' behavior, but we could control our own precautions, how we structured our days, and how we mentally framed the situation. In relationships, the dichotomy of control offers particular insight. Many relationship problems stem from trying to control the uncontrollable, our partner's feelings, thoughts, or behaviors. When we recognize that we can only control our own contributions to the relationship, our communication, understanding, and actions, we create space for authentic connection rather than manipulation or disappointment. Career challenges similarly benefit from this Stoic perspective. Job markets fluctuate, companies restructure, and opportunities arise or disappear due to countless factors beyond our influence. Rather than becoming demoralized by these externals, the Stoic approach encourages focusing on developing skills, maintaining professional relationships, and performing current responsibilities with excellence, all aspects within our control. Political engagement also takes on a different character through the lens of Stoic control. We can't single-handedly determine election outcomes or policy decisions, But we can educate ourselves, participate in civic discourse, vote according to our values, and treat fellow citizens with respect even amid disagreement. This focus prevents both apathy and the burnout that comes from overestimating our individual political impact. Personal setbacks, from minor inconveniences to major tragedies, become more manageable when viewed through the dichotomy of control. If your flight is cancelled, your car breaks down, or your computer crashes before saving an important document, the Stoic recognizes that these events themselves aren't within your control. What remains within your control is your response, whether you'll react with rage and self-pity or with patience and constructive problem-solving. Some modern Stoic practitioners have refined Epictetus's original dichotomy into a trichotomy of control, suggesting that many situations involve aspects we fully control, aspects we have some influence over but don't fully control, and aspects we have no control over whatsoever. This nuanced approach helps avoid oversimplification while maintaining the practical benefits of the original teaching. What makes the dichotomy of control so enduring is its universal applicability. Regardless of culture, historical period, or personal circumstances, all humans face the fundamental reality that our direct control extends only to our own choices and attitudes. External events, other people, and ultimate outcomes will always contain elements beyond our complete influence. Practicing this principle doesn't happen overnight. It requires ongoing attention and reinforcement. Many Stoic practitioners recommend regular reflection on this boundary, perhaps through journaling or meditation. Some suggest a simple evening review. What did I try to control today that wasn't actually mine to control? Where did I focus well on what was within my power? As with any philosophical principle, the dichotomy of control becomes most valuable when we move beyond theoretical understanding to lived practice. It's not enough to intellectually grasp the distinction between what's up to us and not up to us. The real transformation comes from consistently applying this insight in daily decisions, emotional responses, and interactions with others. The freedom this principle offers is profound. When we stop exhausting ourselves trying to control the uncontrollable, we discover energy and attention for what genuinely matters, developing our character, contributing positively to our communities, and responding virtuously to whatever circumstances we encounter. Perhaps this is why, centuries after Epictetus first articulated it, the dichotomy of control remains one of the most practical and liberating aspects of Stoic philosophy. The freedom that comes from recognizing the boundaries of our control extends to one of life's most intimidating certainties, our own mortality. While many of us spend considerable energy avoiding thoughts of death, the Stoics took a radically different approach. They believed that confronting our mortality directly, rather than hiding from it, actually helps us live more meaningful, virtuous lives. This perspective on death represents one of Stoicism's most distinctive and potentially transformative teachings. Have you ever noticed how the awareness of limited time can suddenly clarify what truly matters to you? This insight wasn't lost on the ancient Stoics. They recognized that our mortality isn't just a biological fact, but a powerful psychological tool that can reshape how we live each day. Their approach wasn't morbid or depressing, quite the opposite. By integrating death awareness into daily life, they found greater appreciation for the present moment and clearer perspective on what constitutes a well-lived life. Seneca, one of Rome's most influential Stoic philosophers who lived from approximately 4 BCE to 65 CE, frequently addressed death in his writings. In his letters to his friend Lucilius, he advised, "Rehearse death." By this, he didn't mean becoming obsessed with dying, but rather periodically contemplating our mortality as a philosophical exercise. He suggested that regularly reflecting on death helps eliminate the fear of it, while simultaneously enhancing our appreciation for life. "Let us prepare our minds as if we'd come to the very end of life," Seneca wrote. "Let us postpone nothing. Let us balance life's books each day." The one who puts the finishing touches on their life each day is never short of time. This practice encourages us to live as if each day might be our last, not in a reckless way, but in a manner that prioritizes what truly matters. The Stoics had a specific phrase for this contemplative practice, memento mori, which translates to, "Remember you must die." Far from being a morbid reminder, this phrase served as a tool for maintaining perspective and avoiding getting caught up in trivial concerns. When you remember that your time is finite, petty grievances, unnecessary luxuries, and time-wasting activities naturally lose their appeal. What remains are the things of genuine value, virtuous action, meaningful relationships, and constructive contributions to others. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor who ruled Rome from 161 to 180 CE, wrote extensively about death in his personal journal, which we now know as Meditations. He reminded himself, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." This wasn't pessimistic fatalism, but a practical reminder that our time is limited and therefore precious. By keeping death in mind, Marcus sought to avoid procrastination and live according to his highest values. What makes the Stoic perspective on death particularly interesting is how it differs from many common attitudes. Rather than seeing death as an evil to be feared or a taboo topic to be avoided in conversation, the Stoics viewed it as simply a natural process, as natural as birth. They pointed out that death is part of the larger cycle of nature, where everything that comes into existence eventually returns to its elements. Epictetus, who we mentioned earlier when discussing the dichotomy of control, used an interesting analogy about death. He compared life to a voyage at sea, saying that when your ship anchors, you might go ashore to get water, collect shells, or enjoy the surroundings. But you always keep an eye on the ship, knowing that at any moment the captain might call for your return. When that call comes, you must be ready to leave everything behind and board immediately. In this view, our time alive is like that shore excursion, enjoyable and meaningful, but always temporary. The Stoics made a particularly interesting philosophical argument about why death itself cannot be bad. They reasoned that harm or suffering requires experience, but death is precisely the absence of experience. As Epicurus, not himself a Stoic, but making a point the Stoics appreciated, put it, "Where death is, I am not. Where I am, death is not." In other words, we never actually experience our own non-existence. This reasoning led Stoics to conclude that fearing death is irrational, since what we fear cannot actually harm us in the way we imagine. This doesn't mean the Stoics were callous about death or dismissed the grief that comes with losing loved ones. They acknowledged that attachment and loss are part of human experience. However, they encouraged preparing for such losses by regularly reminding ourselves of the temporary nature of everything we cherish. Epictetus advised that when kissing your child goodnight, you should silently remind yourself that they are mortal. The point wasn't to diminish the love or create anxiety, but to appreciate the present moment more fully by acknowledging its impermanence. Modern psychology has largely validated many Stoic insights about mortality awareness. Research in the field of terror management theory shows that while death anxiety can be paralyzing, constructive contemplation of mortality can lead to more authentic living and greater appreciation of meaningful experiences. Studies have found that people who develop healthy relationships with mortality often report greater life satisfaction and make choices more aligned with their core values. How might someone practice Stoic death awareness today? There are several approaches that don't require adopting the entire Stoic philosophical system. Some people keep symbolic reminders, a quote, a special object, or even artistic representations of mortality to prompt occasional reflection. Others build brief contemplative practices into their routines, perhaps spending a few minutes each morning considering the finite nature of life and how that knowledge should shape the day ahead. Some contemporary practitioners have adapted the ancient Stoic exercise of premeditatio malorum, premeditation of evils, to include contemplation of their own death. This might involve visualizing the end of your life and considering what you would regret leaving undone or unsaid. Rather than inducing anxiety, this practice often creates clarity about priorities and motivates meaningful action in the present. For those facing serious illness or advanced age, Stoic perspectives on death can be particularly relevant. The emphasis on accepting natural processes and focusing on what remains within our control offers a framework for maintaining dignity and peace of mind, even as physical capabilities decline. Many hospice and palliative care approaches incorporate elements that would be familiar to ancient Stoics, focusing on meaningful connection, finding purpose in the present moment, and accepting with equanimity what cannot be changed. Even for younger, healthier individuals, Stoic mortality awareness offers powerful benefits. In our culture of distraction, where countless entertainment options and digital stimuli compete for our attention, remembering the finite nature of time helps us make more intentional choices. When we recognize that we won't live forever, we become less likely to postpone important conversations, delay pursuing meaningful goals, or waste time on activities that don't align with our values. The workplace provides an interesting context for applying Stoic death awareness. Many people spend decades in careers that don't truly engage their talents or reflect their values, always planning to pursue more meaningful work someday. The Stoic would point out that someday isn't guaranteed and might encourage finding purpose in current work while making deliberate choices about future directions. This doesn't necessarily mean dramatic career changes. Sometimes it simply means bringing more attention and virtue to our current responsibilities. Relationships also transform when viewed through the lens of mortality. Petty conflicts and grudges often dissolve when we consider that neither we nor our loved ones will be here forever. The awareness that each interaction could theoretically be our last with someone encourages presence, forgiveness, and expressing appreciation that might otherwise remain unspoken. Many people who have experienced the unexpected loss of someone close report, wishing they had said certain things while they had the chance. The Stoic practice helps us avoid such regrets. In our consumer culture, Stoic death awareness serves as a powerful antidote to materialism. When we contemplate our mortality, accumulating possessions typically loses its appeal. After all, everything we own will eventually belong to someone else. This perspective encourages focusing on experiences, relationships, and contributions rather than acquisitions. A shift research suggests leads to greater well-being. It's worth noting that Stoic approaches to death differ significantly from some religious perspectives, which often focus on afterlife beliefs. The Stoics generally maintained agnosticism about what, if anything, might follow death. Their practices focused on living well in the face of mortality rather than specific afterlife preparations. This makes their approach accessible regardless of religious beliefs or lack thereof. Modern therapeutic approaches for anxiety and existential distress often incorporate elements similar to Stoic death meditation. Acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, for instance, helps people acknowledge difficult realities, including mortality, while committing to living according to their values despite these challenges. Similarly, mindfulness practices encourage non-reactive awareness of passing thoughts and sensations, which can include fears about death. Perhaps what's most striking about the Stoic approach to death is how life-affirming it ultimately is. Rather than dampening enthusiasm for living, mortality awareness heightens appreciation for each moment and each relationship. By facing death directly, we paradoxically become more fully alive, more present, more purposeful, and more grateful for the time we have. The Stoic message isn't that life is short and therefore meaningless, but rather that life is short and therefore infinitely precious. Each moment becomes an opportunity to express our highest values and make a positive difference, however small, in the lives of others. This life-affirming aspect of Stoic mortality awareness naturally extends beyond our individual experiences to our relationships with others and society at large. If our time is precious and finite, how should we spend it in relation to other people? The Stoics had a distinctive answer to this question, grounded in their concept of cosmopolitanism, the belief that all human beings, regardless of background, belong to a single moral community. This radical perspective on human connection shaped how Stoics understood their social duties and ethical responsibilities. When we think about our identities today, we often define ourselves through multiple layers: family member, professional, citizen of a particular country, member of specific groups or communities. The ancient Stoics recognized these natural affiliations but proposed something revolutionary for their time: the idea that our most fundamental identity transcends all these particular attachments. They believed that all humans, by virtue of sharing rational nature, are part of a universal human community, citizens of the cosmos rather than merely citizens of Rome, Athens, or any other specific place. This wasn't just abstract philosophy. In an era of pronounced social hierarchy, ethnic divisions, and slavery, Stoic cosmopolitanism represented a profound challenge to conventional thinking. Imagine living in ancient Rome, where strict social classes determined nearly every aspect of life, and encountering the idea that a slave and an emperor share a fundamental human dignity based on their common rational nature. That's precisely what Stoic teachers like Epictetus, himself a former slave, proposed. Marcus Aurelius, despite being Roman emperor with all the privilege and power that entailed, expressed this cosmopolitan outlook beautifully in his personal writings. He described humanity as a single body, with individual people functioning as limbs meant to work together rather than against each other. He wrote, "We were born to work together like feet, hands, and eyes, like the two rows of teeth, upper and lower. To obstruct each other is unnatural." This organic metaphor captured the Stoic belief in human interconnection and mutual support. In practical terms, Marcus thought about human relationships as a series of concentric circles. The innermost circle contains ourselves, then expanding outward to include family, friends, fellow citizens, and ultimately all of humanity. The Stoic goal wasn't to eliminate special concern for those closest to us, but rather to continually work on expanding our circle of concern outward, recognizing our ethical connection to all human beings, even strangers and those conventionally considered enemies. This universal perspective directly influenced how Stoics understood justice. Rather than seeing justice merely as following local laws or customs, they viewed it as treating all human beings according to their inherent worth as rational beings. This meant recognizing that certain moral considerations apply to everyone, regardless of social status, nationality, or personal connection to us. In an age where different rules often applied to different classes of people, this universal conception of justice was revolutionary. Hierocles, a later Stoic philosopher, suggested a practical exercise for developing this cosmopolitan outlook. He recommended visualizing those concentric circles of relationship and working to draw the circles somehow toward the center. This meant actively practicing seeing distant others, those in faraway countries, from different cultures, or with different beliefs, as more like our close family and friends. He suggested concrete practices like referring to strangers as brother or sister to reinforce this sense of human connection. What makes Stoic cosmopolitanism particularly interesting is that it wasn't a call for withdrawal from society into some idealized philosophical community. Unlike some ancient philosophical schools that advocated retreat from civic life, the Stoics believed that cosmopolitan values should be expressed through active participation in one's actual community. They taught that we have duties to contribute positively to society, rather than withdraw from it. Cicero, who was influenced by Stoic ideas though not strictly a Stoic himself, wrote extensively about social duties. He argued that nature has given humans not just self-interest, but also a drive towards social connection and mutual support. According to this view, pursuing purely private goods while ignoring our social responsibilities goes against human nature. The well-lived human life necessarily includes fulfilling our duties to others, as family members, friends, citizens, and members of the human community. This emphasis on social duty appears throughout Stoic writings. Seneca, despite his enormous wealth and privilege, emphasized obligations to treat all people with respect and to contribute to the common good. He wrote that no one can live happily who turns everything to his own purposes alone, who counts nothing worthwhile unless it brings him some profit. True flourishing for the Stoics included benefiting others and playing one's proper role in society. What does this mean in practice? The Stoics weren't prescriptive about exactly what form social duty should take for each person. They recognized that different people have different capacities, positions, and opportunities to contribute. The key was using whatever position you occupied to benefit others while maintaining your own virtue. A teacher would educate with dedication and integrity, a merchant would trade fairly, a politician would govern justly, each playing their part in the larger social fabric. Marcus Aurelius embodied this approach in his role as emperor. Rather than seeing his power as a means for personal indulgence, he viewed it as a profound responsibility to serve others. He frequently reminded himself of his duty to work for the common good. Writing: when you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are like this because they can't tell good from bad. But I have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own. This recognition of shared humanity informed how he approached his considerable social responsibilities. The Stoic approach beautifully balances self-development with social responsibility. Modern interpretations sometimes mischaracterize Stoicism as focused solely on personal tranquility or emotional control, but this misses half the picture. For the Stoics, inner development and social contribution weren't opposing goals, but complementary aspects of the same philosophical project. Developing virtues like wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance wasn't just for personal benefit, but equipped one to better serve others. This balanced perspective offers a refreshing alternative to false dichotomies we often encounter today. We're frequently presented with choices between taking care of ourselves or caring for others, between pursuing personal development or social activism, between focusing on our immediate circle or addressing global concerns. The Stoic would suggest these aren't necessarily opposing choices. By developing our own character and abilities, we become better equipped to contribute meaningfully to others' well-being. Modern interpretations of Stoic cosmopolitanism have found particular relevance in addressing contemporary global challenges. In a world facing climate change, economic inequality, and cross-cultural tensions, the Stoic recognition of our fundamental interconnection offers valuable perspective. If we truly are members of a single human community sharing a planet with limited resources, certain ethical implications naturally follow about how we should structure our societies and economic systems. Environmental ethics, for instance, takes on new dimensions when viewed through a Stoic cosmopolitan lens. If we have duties not just to our immediate community, but to all of humanity, including future generations, then how we use and protect natural resources becomes a matter of justice rather than just preference. The Stoic emphasis on moderation and restraint of excessive desires further supports sustainable approaches to consumption and resource use. Similarly, economic inequality can be examined through the Stoic understanding of human dignity and interconnection. While Stoics weren't economic revolutionaries seeking to abolish all wealth distinctions, they did emphasize that material advantages don't determine human worth. Their cosmopolitan perspective suggests that extreme disparities in basic necessities would be difficult to justify if we truly recognize our shared humanity and mutual dependence. Cross-cultural understanding also benefits from Stoic insights. By emphasizing our common rational nature while acknowledging different customs and practices, Stoicism offers a middle path between rigid universalism that ignores cultural differences and extreme relativism that abandons shared ethical standards. This balanced approach recognizes both our common humanity and our diverse expressions of it. Practicing Stoic cosmopolitanism today might look quite different than it did in ancient Rome, but the core principles remain applicable. It might involve consciously expanding our circle of moral concern beyond family, friends, and nation to include those in distant countries affected by our consumption choices, economic policies, or environmental impacts. It might mean recognizing our social duties in professional contexts, ensuring our work contributes positively rather than merely advancing personal interests. On an interpersonal level, Stoic cosmopolitanism encourages seeing others, even difficult people, as fellow citizens of the cosmos, deserving of basic respect and consideration. This doesn't mean approving all behaviors or avoiding appropriate boundaries, but it does mean maintaining an awareness of shared humanity, even in conflict. Marcus Aurelius advised himself to remember that even those who opposed or frustrated him were still, in an important sense, his brothers and sisters in the human family. Digital technologies have created new contexts for applying Stoic social ethics. Online interactions often lack the face-to-face cues that naturally evoke empathy, making it easier to forget the humanity of those with whom we disagree. A Stoic approach would emphasize maintaining awareness of the real people behind digital profiles and treating online conversations with the same ethical consideration we would apply to in-person interactions. Political engagement also takes on a distinctive character when informed by Stoic cosmopolitanism. Rather than viewing politics primarily through partisan identity or tribal affiliation, the Stoic would emphasize policies and approaches that recognize the dignity and needs of all community members. This doesn't eliminate principled disagreement about how best to achieve common goods, but it does reframe the conversation around shared human interests rather than just competing group identities. What makes Stoic cosmopolitanism particularly valuable today is how it combines idealism about human connection with pragmatism about human nature. The Stoics weren't naive utopians expecting perfect harmony. They recognized human failings, conflicts of interest, and limitations of understanding. Yet they maintained that beneath these real differences lies a common rational nature that makes mutual respect and cooperation possible despite our differences. This balanced perspective offers a hopeful but realistic framework for navigating an increasingly interconnected world. It acknowledges our special obligations to those closest to us while extending basic ethical consideration to all humanity. It recognizes diverse cultural expressions while maintaining certain universal ethical principles. And perhaps most importantly, it reminds us that developing our own character and contributing to others' well-being aren't separate projects but integral aspects of a well-lived human life. The development of our own character while contributing to the well-being of others requires a particular skill that the Stoics considered essential: the ability to regulate our emotional responses. This aspect of Stoicism is perhaps the most widely misunderstood. Many people associate Stoicism with being emotionless, cold, or suppressing all feelings. However, this popular misconception completely misses what the ancient Stoics actually taught about emotions. Far from eliminating emotions, they developed sophisticated approaches to transform harmful emotional patterns into healthier ones. Have you ever reacted to a situation with an emotional response that you later regretted? Or found yourself caught in cycles of anxiety, anger, or resentment that seemed to control you rather than the other way around? The Stoics recognized these common human experiences and developed practical techniques to address them. Their approach wasn't about becoming emotionless robots, but about cultivating emotional intelligence and resilience. To understand Stoic emotional regulation, we need to clarify an important distinction they made. The Stoics differentiated between what they called patha, unhealthy, reactive emotions based on mistaken judgments, and eupatheiai, healthy, rational emotions based on accurate understanding. They weren't trying to eliminate all emotions, but rather to transform harmful emotional patterns into beneficial ones. Take anger as an example. The Stoics viewed anger as a pathe, a harmful emotion based on the judgment that someone has wronged you and that vengeance is appropriate. Seneca, who wrote an entire treatise called On Anger, described it as temporary madness that clouds judgment and often leads to regrettable actions. However, this doesn't mean Stoics aim to replace anger with nothing. Instead, they sought to transform it into appropriate concern, the rational motivation to address wrongdoing while maintaining clear judgment and proportionate response. Similarly, they viewed anxiety about future events as a pathe, based on the mistaken judgment that future uncertainties are necessarily threatening and unmanageable. The healthy alternative wasn't indifference to the future, but caution, the rational awareness of potential challenges coupled with appropriate preparation, without the paralyzing fear. What makes the Stoic approach particularly interesting is how psychological it was, especially for an ancient philosophy. The Stoics recognize that our emotions don't simply happen to us, they arise from our judgments and interpretations of events. As Epictetus famously put it, it's not things that upset people, but their judgments about things. This insight anticipates modern cognitive theories of emotion by almost 2,000 years. The Stoics developed sophisticated techniques for identifying what we might today call cognitive distortions, patterns of thinking that generate emotional distress. They recognized that our initial impressions of situations are often colored by assumptions, projections, and misinterpretations that we're not immediately aware of. By learning to examine these automatic interpretations, we can correct inaccurate judgments and thereby transform our emotional responses. One of their most well-known techniques is called premeditatio malorum, or premeditation of evils. This practice involves deliberately imagining challenging situations that might arise in the future. The goal isn't to induce anxiety, but quite the opposite: to reduce it by mentally preparing for difficulties before they occur. By rehearsing potential challenges in advance, we reduce the shock and reactivity when they actually happen. For example, a modern person might practice this by briefly imagining losing their job, experiencing a relationship breakup, or facing a health challenge. The point isn't to dwell morbidly on these possibilities, but to mentally rehearse responding to them with virtue and resilience. This reduces fear of these scenarios and builds confidence in our ability to handle whatever comes our way. Another key Stoic insight about emotions involves what modern psychologists might call the stimulus-response gap, the space between an event and our reaction to it. The Stoics emphasize that no matter how automatic our emotional reactions seem, there's always a moment, however brief, where judgment occurs. By expanding this gap through practice, we create more space for rational evaluation before emotional reaction. Epictetus described this process clearly. Make it your study, then, to confront every harsh impression with the words, "You are but an impression, and not at all what you seem to be." This practice of mentally labeling our initial reactions as just impressions creates separation between us and our automatic thoughts, allowing us to evaluate them more objectively. This approach distinguishes between the initial automatic impression of an event and the subsequent judgment we make about it. The impression itself, the immediate sense data and initial reaction, isn't fully within our control, but the judgment, our considered evaluation of what the event means, is within our control. By locating our freedom in the judgment rather than the impression, the Stoics offered a practical path to emotional self-regulation. Consider how this might work in everyday life. Imagine someone cuts you off in traffic. The initial impression might include a surge of adrenaline, a flash of anger, and thoughts like, "What a jerk." The Stoic practice would involve recognizing this as just an impression, then evaluating it more rationally. This person made a dangerous driving choice. I don't know why. Perhaps an emergency, perhaps carelessness. Either way, maintaining my own calm driving is what's within my control right now. This doesn't mean suppressing the initial reaction or pretending not to feel anything. It means developing the habit of not automatically believing and acting on every impression that arises in our minds. With practice, this approach doesn't just change our responses after emotions arise. It actually transforms which emotions arise in the first place, as our initial perceptions become more accurate. Modern psychological research has validated many aspects of this approach. Cognitive behavioral therapy, one of the most empirically supported forms of psychotherapy, shares striking similarities with Stoic emotional regulation techniques. Both emphasize how thoughts and interpretations generate emotions. Both teach examining automatic thoughts for accuracy, and both involve practicing alternative interpretations that lead to healthier emotional states. The Stoic approach to managing specific emotions offers particularly relevant strategies for contemporary life. For anxiety, Stoics recommended clearly distinguishing between what we can and cannot control, focusing efforts only on the former while accepting the latter. They also practiced negative visualization to reduce fear of worst-case scenarios and build confidence in our ability to handle difficulties. For anger management, Seneca suggested techniques that remain relevant today, creating distance before responding. He recommended reciting the alphabet when angry. Considering the perspective of the person who provoked your anger, examining whether your own actions may have contributed to the situation, and remembering that forgiveness benefits the forgiver as much as the forgiven. For grief, the Stoics took a nuanced approach that's often misunderstood. They didn't advise eliminating grief entirely. They recognized it as a natural human response to loss. However, they suggested that excessive or prolonged grief stems from certain judgments about our loss that intensify suffering beyond what's inevitable. By examining these judgments, particularly the idea that we cannot possibly be okay without what we've lost, we can experience grief without being completely overwhelmed by it. The Stoic approach to emotions proves especially valuable in our digital age, where social media and constant news exposure can trigger frequent emotional reactions. Many people report feeling emotionally drained by the constant barrage of upsetting information and polarizing content online. Stoic practices like questioning initial impressions, distinguishing between what we can and cannot control, and intentionally creating space between stimulus and response offer practical tools for maintaining emotional equilibrium in this environment. Workplace applications of Stoic emotional regulation are similarly valuable. Professional settings often involve stressful deadlines, difficult colleagues, critical feedback, and high-stakes decisions, all potential triggers for reactive emotions that can cloud judgment and damage relationships. The ability to maintain emotional balance while still caring deeply about outcomes and treating others with respect represents a significant professional advantage that Stoic practices can help develop. Personal relationships likewise benefit from improved emotional regulation. Many relationship conflicts escalate because one or both people react immediately to their initial impressions without examining them. The Stoic practice of questioning impressions and creating space before responding can prevent many arguments from spiraling out of control. This doesn't mean becoming detached from partners, family, or friends. It means bringing more accurate perceptions and thoughtful responses to these important relationships. It's important to note that Stoic emotional regulation isn't about judging ourselves harshly for having normal human reactions. The Stoics recognized that developing better emotional responses is a gradual process requiring ongoing practice. They advocated patience with ourselves as we work to align our emotional reactions more closely with our rational values. Self-compassion rather than self-criticism provides the foundation for genuine emotional growth. The practical nature of Stoic emotional regulation makes it accessible regardless of whether one adopts the entire philosophical system. Many people who wouldn't identify as Stoics nevertheless find value in specific techniques like distinguishing between what they can and cannot control, questioning automatic interpretations of events, or practicing negative visualization to build resilience. These practices can complement many other approaches to well-being, from religious frameworks to modern therapeutic methods. What makes Stoic emotional regulation particularly valuable is its integration of psychological insight with ethical development. Unlike some approaches that treat emotional regulation merely as a tool for personal comfort or productivity, the Stoics saw it as integral to developing virtue and contributing positively to society. By learning to respond to situations based on rational values rather than automatic reactions, we become better able to act justly, courageously, and wisely in our interactions with others. The Stoics remind us that emotional regulation isn't about controlling how we feel, so much as developing better ways of seeing. When our perceptions become more accurate, when we see situations more as they actually are rather than through the distorting lens of automatic assumptions, our emotions naturally align more closely with reality. This process doesn't happen overnight, but with consistent practice, it gradually transforms our emotional landscape into one characterized by greater stability, resilience, and appropriate responsiveness to what life presents. The way Stoic ideas transform our emotional landscape through more accurate perceptions hasn't gone unnoticed by modern mental health professionals. In fact, there's a fascinating connection between this ancient philosophy and contemporary psychological approaches that's worth exploring. While most people seeking help for emotional difficulties today might walk into a therapist's office rather than consulting ancient philosophical texts, they may be surprised to discover just how much modern therapeutic techniques owe to Stoic insights developed over 2,000 years ago. Have you ever heard of cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT? It's one of the most widely practiced and empirically supported forms of psychotherapy in the world today. What many people don't realize is that the founders of CBT explicitly acknowledged their debt to Stoic philosophy. Albert Ellis, who developed rational emotive behavior therapy, a precursor to CBT, and Aaron Beck, who pioneered cognitive therapy, both cited Stoic philosophers as direct influences on their therapeutic approaches. The core premise of CBT, that our emotions and behaviors stem from our thoughts and interpretations rather than directly from events themselves, echoes Epictetus's famous statement that people are disturbed not by things, but by their judgments about things. This fundamental insight forms the backbone of modern cognitive approaches to mental health. When therapists help clients identify and challenge distorted thinking patterns, they're essentially applying the Stoic technique of examining impressions for accuracy. The Stoic distinction between automatic impressions and voluntary judgments finds a direct parallel in contemporary psychological models. In CBT, therapists help clients distinguish between automatic thoughts that arise spontaneously and the more deliberate evaluations we can make about those thoughts. This mirrors the Stoic emphasis on the gap between initial impression and subsequent judgment, that space where our freedom lies. For example, a person experiencing social anxiety might have the automatic thought, "Everyone at this party is judging me negatively," upon entering a room. A CBT therapist would help them recognize this as an automatic thought rather than an objective reality, then examine evidence for and against this interpretation, just as a Stoic would question the accuracy of the initial impression. What's particularly interesting is how research in modern psychology has validated many Stoic practices for building resilience and psychological well-being. Take the Stoic exercise of negative visualization, imagining losing things we value in order to appreciate them more fully. Studies have shown that this practice, when structured appropriately, genuinely increases gratitude and life satisfaction. One study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that contemplating the temporary nature of positive experiences enhanced participants' appreciation and enjoyment of them. Similarly, the Stoic practice of focusing only on what we can control has proven effective in treating anxiety disorders. Therapists often help clients distinguish between productive and unproductive worry, a distinction that maps cleanly onto the Stoic dichotomy of control. By redirecting attention from uncontrollable externals to controllable responses, both approaches reduce unnecessary suffering while maintaining constructive engagement with solvable problems. Research on resilience, the ability to bounce back from adversity, further confirms Stoic insights. Psychologists have identified several factors that contribute to resilience, including realistic optimism, sense of purpose, and cognitive flexibility. These qualities align remarkably well with Stoic teachings about focusing on what we can control, finding meaning in virtuous action, and examining situations from multiple perspectives. The Stoic emphasis on preparing for challenges rather than being blindsided by them also matches findings that anticipatory coping enhances resilience. The field of positive psychology, which focuses on human flourishing rather than just treating disorders, shares significant common ground with Stoicism. Martin Seligman, one of the founders of positive psychology, has discussed how certain Stoic practices align with evidence-based approaches to well-being. Both emphasize that lasting happiness comes not primarily from pleasure or external success, but from meaningful engagement, character development, and contribution to others, themes that appear throughout Stoic writings. Contemporary mindfulness practices represent another area where ancient Stoic wisdom and modern psychology converge. While mindfulness has roots in Buddhist traditions, its emphasis on non-reactive awareness of present moment experience shares much with Stoic mindfulness. When Epictetus advised his students to practice close attention to impressions without automatically accepting them, he was describing a form of mindful awareness remarkably similar to modern mindfulness techniques. Jon Kabat-Zinn's widely researched mindfulness-based stress reduction program teaches participants to observe thoughts and sensations without immediately reacting to them, creating that crucial gap between stimulus and response that Stoics emphasized. Research shows this practice reduces stress, anxiety, and depression while improving attention and emotional regulation, benefits the Stoics would have recognized as supporting progress toward virtue. The integration of Stoic philosophy with evidence-based psychology offers promising approaches for addressing common mental health challenges. For depression, both Stoic practice and cognitive therapy address the negative thought patterns that maintain low mood, catastrophizing, all-or-nothing thinking, and negative self-evaluation. By questioning these thoughts and recognizing them as opinions rather than facts, people can gradually shift toward more accurate and helpful perspectives. For anxiety disorders, Stoic techniques like distinguishing between what we can and cannot control, preparing mentally for challenges, and examining fears objectively complement empirically supported treatments. Exposure therapy, gradually facing feared situations to reduce anxiety, shares the Stoic insight that many fears diminish when confronted directly rather than avoided. Stress management represents another area where Stoic wisdom proves valuable. The Stoic emphasis on focusing attention on the present moment rather than worrying about the future or ruminating about the past aligns with research showing that mindful present focus reduces stress. Similarly, the Stoic practice of putting challenging situations in broader perspective, what Marcus Aurelius called the view from above, matches findings that psychological distance from problems reduces their emotional impact. Even for serious conditions like PTSD, certain Stoic insights complement modern treatments. Cognitive processing therapy, an evidence-based treatment for PTSD, helps survivors examine and revise unhelpful beliefs about their trauma, a process with clear parallels to the Stoic practice of examining impressions for accuracy. While Stoicism alone isn't sufficient treatment for clinical conditions, its principles often align with and can support evidence-based therapeutic approaches. What makes the relationship between Stoicism and modern psychology particularly valuable is how they complement each other. Psychology brings rigorous research methods, clinical expertise, and nuanced understanding of mental health conditions. Stoicism contributes a comprehensive philosophical framework that connects individual well-being with ethical development and meaningful living. Together, they offer a more complete approach than either provides alone. Donald Robertson, a psychotherapist and author who specializes in cognitive behavioral therapy and Stoicism, has written extensively about these connections. His work shows how Stoic exercises can be integrated with modern therapeutic techniques to address contemporary challenges. Other psychologists like Jules Evans have explored how ancient philosophical practices, including Stoicism, can complement and enhance modern approaches to mental health. For everyday issues like workplace stress, relationship conflicts, or the general anxiety of modern life, Stoic-informed psychological strategies offer practical tools. The Stoic practice of role division, clearly distinguishing what's within our control from what isn't, helps prioritize efforts effectively in high-pressure work environments. The emphasis on examining initial impressions before reacting helps prevent unnecessary relationship conflicts. The practice of negative visualization builds resilience against life's inevitable disappointments and losses. Even physical health can benefit from this integration of ancient wisdom and modern research. Psychoneuroimmunology, the study of how psychological factors influence physical health through nervous and immune system interactions, has demonstrated that chronic stress and negative emotional states can compromise immunity and exacerbate inflammation. Stoic practices that reduce unnecessary distress may therefore support not just psychological, but also physical well-being. What's particularly striking about the convergence of Stoicism and psychology is how it bridges the ancient and modern worlds. When Marcus Aurelius wrote in his journal about questioning first impressions, distinguishing between what he could and couldn't control, or viewing challenges from a broader perspective, he couldn't have known that scientific research would eventually validate these approaches. Yet, the psychological insights of the Stoics have proven remarkably durable, standing up to empirical scrutiny after more than 2 millennia. This doesn't mean Stoicism perfectly aligns with all aspects of modern psychology. Contemporary approaches often place greater emphasis on social and environmental factors in mental health, recognize the importance of childhood development, and offer more specialized techniques for specific conditions than ancient Stoicism provided. The Stoic cosmology and metaphysics also differ from the scientific worldview underlying modern psychology. Nevertheless, the core psychological insights of Stoicism, that our emotions stem from our judgments, that we can examine these judgments for accuracy, and that focusing on what we can control reduces unnecessary suffering, have stood the test of time and scientific scrutiny. This convergence suggests these principles reflect something fundamentally true about human psychology, rather than merely cultural or historical contingencies. For anyone interested in personal development, the dialogue between Stoicism and psychology offers valuable resources. Books like How to Think Like a Roman Emperor by Donald Robertson, A Guide to the Good Life by William Irvine, or Stoic Wisdom by Nancy Sherman explore these connections in accessible ways. Various apps and online communities also offer structured approaches to applying Stoic psychological techniques in daily life. What emerges from this exploration is neither pure ancient philosophy nor purely modern psychology, but a constructive integration that draws from both traditions. This integration offers a more complete approach to human flourishing, one that addresses psychological well-being while connecting it to larger questions of meaning, virtue, and our relationships with others. By bringing together the wisdom of ancient philosophy with the empirical rigor of modern psychology, we gain access to a richer understanding of what it means to live well as a human being. This rich understanding of human flourishing brings us to a fundamental question that underlies much of Stoic philosophy. What does it actually mean to live well as a human being? While the psychological aspects we've explored provide valuable practical tools, they're part of a larger Stoic vision centered around what the ancient philosophers considered their central ethical goal: living according to nature. This principle, expressed in Greek as homologumenos te phusei zen, represents the core of Stoic ethics, though its meaning is far more complex and nuanced than the phrase might initially suggest to modern ears. When we hear living according to nature today, we might think of eating organic foods, spending time outdoors, or reducing our environmental footprint. While these aren't necessarily at odds with Stoic thought, they're not what the ancient Stoics primarily meant. For them, nature had a much broader and more profound significance that encompassed both the rational ordering of the entire cosmos and the distinctive rational nature of human beings, specifically. The Stoics held that the universe itself operates according to rational principles, what they sometimes called the logos, or divine reason. They saw nature not as random or chaotic, but as an orderly, interconnected system governed by cause and effect. Everything that happens, they believed, occurs as part of this causal chain, unfolding according to natural laws. Living according to nature meant first recognizing and accepting this fundamental reality, that we exist within a rationally ordered cosmos where events unfold according to causal necessity. Zeno of Citium, who founded Stoicism around 300 BCE in Athens, defined the goal of life as living consistently with nature. His successor Cleanthes expanded this to include both universal nature and human nature specifically. Chrysippus, the third head of the Stoic school, further developed this concept, emphasizing that human nature is specifically rational nature, and therefore living according to nature means living according to reason. So what does this actually mean in practice? First, it involves understanding and accepting the universal causal laws that govern existence. The Stoics believed that events don't happen randomly, but follow necessary patterns. When we recognize this necessity, we stop fighting against reality as it unfolds. This doesn't mean passive resignation, but rather clear-sighted recognition of how the world actually works. For example, if an illness occurs, The Stoic doesn't waste energy lamenting, "Why me?" or pretending it isn't happening. They accept the reality of the situation as part of nature's unfolding, then focus their energy on responding virtuously within that reality. They understand that certain events, aging, illness, loss, are natural and inevitable aspects of human existence rather than aberrations or cosmic injustices. But Stoic nature encompasses more than just accepting necessary events. It also refers specifically to human nature, which the Stoics understood as fundamentally rational. Unlike other animals that operate primarily by instinct, humans possess the capacity for reason, the ability to understand, plan, evaluate, and make deliberate choices. Living according to nature, therefore, means living according to this distinctive rational capacity. This rational nature expresses itself through the virtues we explored earlier: wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. These aren't arbitrary ideals, but the natural expression of human reason, functioning excellently. Just as a plant naturally grows toward sunlight, the Stoics believed human beings naturally develop toward virtue when their rational capacity flourishes properly. Living according to nature also means aligning our personal goals with the broader good. The Stoics observed that humans are naturally social beings, designed to live cooperatively in communities. Therefore, actions that benefit only the individual at the expense of the community go against our true nature. This doesn't mean sacrificing all personal interests, but rather recognizing that genuine human flourishing includes contributing positively to the larger whole. What makes the Stoic concept of nature particularly interesting is how it integrates ethics with physics and metaphysics. For the Stoics, these weren't separate domains, but interconnected aspects of a comprehensive philosophical system. Their understanding of the physical universe informed their ethical teachings, and their ethics reflected their metaphysical commitments. Living according to nature wasn't just a moral precept, but a principle grounded in their understanding of cosmic reality. The Stoics believed that the same divine reason, logos, that orders the universe also exists within humans as our capacity for rationality. By developing and expressing this rationality through virtuous action, we align ourselves with the larger rational order of the cosmos. Marcus Aurelius expressed this connection beautifully when he wrote about how all things are interwoven and how all things are implicated with one another, and the bond is holy. This cosmic perspective influenced how Stoics viewed social arrangements, justice, and human equality. If all humans possess the same rational nature, a spark of the same divine reason that governs the cosmos, then all have inherent dignity regardless of social status, wealth, or origin. This natural equality formed the basis for the Stoic cosmopolitanism we explored earlier, the recognition that all people belong to a single human community by virtue of their shared rational nature. The Stoic concept of nature also shaped their approach to ethics more generally. Rather than seeing moral rules as arbitrary conventions or divine commands, they understood virtue as the natural expression of human rationality functioning properly. Actions in accordance with nature weren't just right in an abstract sense, but represented the fulfillment of our natural human potential. How might this ancient concept apply in contemporary contexts? While modern science offers different explanations for natural phenomena than Stoic physics provided, the core insight about aligning our lives with natural reality remains valuable. Understanding the scientific principles that govern our world and our bodies helps us make more effective choices, working with rather than against natural processes. The Stoic emphasis on accepting natural limitations while focusing on our responses similarly remains relevant. We can't control the natural aging process, for instance, but we can control how we respond to it, whether with denial and resentment or with graceful adaptation and continued focus on what we can contribute regardless of age. This acceptance of natural reality doesn't mean fatalism, but rather clear-sighted engagement with life as it actually is. Contemporary environmental ethics finds both valuable insights and potential limitations in the Stoic conception of nature. On one hand, the Stoic recognition of interconnection within nature aligns well with ecological understanding of ecosystems and interdependence. Their emphasis on moderating desires and living simply to align with natural limitations similarly supports sustainable approaches to consumption and resource use. On the other hand, the ancient Stoics lacked our modern scientific understanding of ecological systems and the environmental impacts of human activity. They couldn't have anticipated issues like climate change, biodiversity loss, or pollution on the scale we face today. While their general principles of working with rather than against nature remain valuable, applying Stoic thought to environmental issues requires thoughtful adaptation rather than direct application. Some modern environmental philosophers have attempted to develop Stoic environmentalism that maintains core Stoic principles while incorporating contemporary ecological understanding. This approach emphasizes that genuinely living according to nature today requires understanding and respecting ecological limits, recognizing our embeddedness in natural systems, and exercising the virtue of temperance regarding resource consumption. The Stoic concept of natural law has also influenced thinking about ethics and justice throughout Western history. The idea that certain moral principles derive from nature itself, rather than merely from convention or decree, shaped Roman jurisprudence and later European legal thought. While modern ethical frameworks often emphasize different foundations, the Stoic insight that ethics isn't arbitrary but connected to natural reality continues to resonate. For the individuals seeking to apply Stoic principles today, living according to nature might involve several practical dimensions. First, it means developing accurate understanding of reality, both the external world and our own psychology, rather than living in illusion or denial. This includes recognizing our mortality, the impermanence of possessions and status, and the limits of our control over external events. Second, it involves cultivating our distinctively human capacity for rationality, learning to think clearly, evaluate situations accurately, and make decisions based on reason rather than impulse or social pressure. This doesn't mean suppressing emotions entirely, but rather ensuring they're informed by accurate understanding rather than distorted impressions. Third, it means recognizing our social nature and the obligations that come with it. If humans are naturally social beings designed to live cooperatively, then genuinely flourishing involves contributing positively to our communities rather than pursuing narrow self-interest at others' expense. This aligns with the Stoic emphasis on justice as a cardinal virtue. Fourth, living according to nature involves accepting what we cannot change while focusing energy on what we can. This doesn't mean passive resignation, but rather clear-sighted recognition of natural limitations, coupled with determined effort within those limitations. When we stop fighting against immutable aspects of reality, we can direct our energy more effectively toward constructive action. What makes the Stoic concept of nature particularly valuable is how it provides a unified framework for understanding both cosmic reality and human excellence. Rather than seeing virtue as separate from or opposed to nature, the Stoics recognized it as the fulfillment of our natural potential as rational beings. This integration helps avoid the split between is and ought that troubles many ethical systems, grounding moral guidance in natural reality rather than abstract ideals disconnected from how the world actually works. The Stoic vision of living according to nature offers a compelling alternative to both unrestrained individualism and rigid conformity to social expectations. It encourages us to develop our unique potential as rational beings while recognizing our embeddedness in both natural systems and human communities. This balanced perspective provides orientation for navigating life's complexities with wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance, the virtues that express our nature at its best. While the Stoic vision of living according to nature provides a compelling philosophical framework, many people might wonder how to actually put these ideas into practice. After all, understanding a philosophy intellectually is quite different from embodying it in daily life. The ancient Stoics recognized this challenge and developed a comprehensive system of practical exercises designed to transform abstract philosophical principles into lived experience and character development. These weren't just occasional activities, but structured practices integrated into daily routines to gradually reshape habits of thought and action. Have you ever tried to change a long-standing habit or develop a new skill? If so, you know that simply understanding what you should do isn't enough. You need consistent practice. The Stoics approached character development with this same practical mindset, creating exercises that could be practiced regularly to internalize philosophical principles and develop virtuous habits. One of the most fundamental Stoic practices involved bookending each day with structured reflection. The morning preparation, sometimes called premeditatio, involved taking a few moments at the start of the day to mentally rehearse potential challenges and plan virtuous responses. A Stoic might think about upcoming meetings, potential conflicts, or difficult tasks, considering how to approach each situation with wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. This wasn't an exercise in anxiety or pessimism, but rather practical preparation. By anticipating challenges in advance, the practitioner could respond more thoughtfully when those situations actually arose, rather than reacting automatically. Seneca described this practice as anticipating difficulties so they wouldn't catch you unprepared. In modern terms, we might call this mental rehearsal or implementation intentions, techniques that research shows genuinely improve our ability to respond effectively to challenging situations. The evening reflection complemented this morning practice by reviewing the day's events, examining both successes and failures. The Stoic would ask questions like, "What did I do well today? Where did I fall short? How could I improve tomorrow?" This wasn't an exercise in self-criticism, but rather honest assessment aimed at continued growth. By recognizing both progress and areas for improvement, the practitioner maintained momentum in developing virtue. Epictetus recommended this evening practice to his students. "Allow not sleep to close your wearied eyes until you have reckoned up each daytime deed. Where did I go wrong? What did I do? What duty left undone?" From first to last, review your acts and then reprove yourself for wretched acts, but rejoice in those done well. This systematic review created accountability and reinforced the commitment to living according to Stoic principles. Written exercises formed another important category of Stoic practice. The most famous example is Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, a personal journal never intended for publication, in which the emperor recorded reflections, reminders, and encouragement to himself. This practice, called hypomnemata, personal reflective writing, served to reinforce philosophical principles through repetition and application to specific situations. Unlike today's journaling practices that often focus primarily on self-expression or recording events, Stoic writing exercises aimed specifically at internalizing philosophical principles and examining one's progress in living according to them. By writing down key insights and applications, practitioners created personalized philosophical guidance they could review regularly. For example, in his journal, Marcus often reminded himself of his mortality. "You may leave this life at any moment. Have this possibility in your mind in all that you do or say or think." He wrote about the importance of focusing on what he could control. "Make the best use of what is in your power. and take the rest as it happens. These weren't just abstract reflections, but practical reminders that helped him maintain philosophical perspective amid the pressures of ruling an empire. Modern practitioners have adapted this written exercise in various ways. Some keep philosophical journals where they apply Stoic principles to current challenges. Others create personalized collections of quotes and reflections that resonate with them, reviewing these regularly to reinforce core principles. The key element is using writing as a tool for internalizing philosophical insights rather than just recording them. The Stoics also developed physical practices that complemented their mental exercises. Perhaps the most distinctive was voluntary discomfort, deliberately enduring minor hardships to train resilience and reduce attachment to comfort. Seneca, despite his wealth, periodically practiced living simply, eating plain food, wearing basic clothing, and sleeping on a hard mat. The goal wasn't self-punishment, but practical training to distinguish between genuine harm and mere discomfort. Musonius Rufus, a Stoic teacher and contemporary of Seneca, emphasized the importance of physical training alongside philosophical study. It is not possible for a person to live as he should if he has only been taught but has not practiced. He recommended exercises that develop both physical endurance and temperance, arguing that the body needed training to support the mind's philosophical development. These voluntary hardship practices served several purposes. First, they reduced fear of discomfort and deprivation by demonstrating through direct experience that one could endure such conditions without genuine harm. Second, they weakened attachment to luxury and comfort, making it easier to maintain equanimity regardless of external circumstances. Third, they built confidence in one's resilience, providing evidence that one could handle difficulties when they arose naturally. Modern adaptations of voluntary discomfort include practices like cold showers, fasting for limited periods, simplifying possessions, temporarily abstaining from digital devices, or walking instead of driving when feasible. The point isn't asceticism for its own sake, but practical training in non-attachment to comfort and convenience. Contemplative exercises formed another important category of Stoic practice. The view from above, also called the cosmic perspective, involved mentally zooming out to consider events from an expansive viewpoint beyond individual concerns. The practitioner would imagine viewing their situation from progressively higher perspectives, from above their city, their country, the planet, and ultimately the cosmos. Marcus Aurelius described this exercise. You can rid yourself of many useless things among those that disturb you, for they lie entirely in your imagination. And you will then gain for yourself ample space by comprehending the whole universe in your mind, and by contemplating the eternity of time and observing the rapid change of each part of everything. How short is the time from birth to dissolution, and the illimitable time before birth, as well as the equally boundless time after dissolution. This practice helped reduce emotional reactivity by placing individual concerns in broader context. Problems that seemed overwhelming from a narrow perspective often appeared less significant when viewed as tiny parts of an immense whole. This didn't mean dismissing genuine concerns, but rather gaining proportionate perspective on them. Another key contemplative practice involved dwelling on the impermanence of all things. Stoics regularly reminded themselves that everything, possessions, status, relationships, even their own bodies, was temporary. Rather than being depressing, this awareness was meant to increase appreciation for what we currently have, while reducing excessive attachment. Epictetus suggested a specific technique for this practice. When enjoying anything you value, remind yourself of its temporary nature. When you kiss your child, brother, or friend, he advised, say that you are kissing a mortal. Again, this wasn't meant to diminish joy, but to enhance it through awareness of impermanence while preparing the mind for inevitable changes. The Stoics also practiced perspective-taking. deliberately considering situations from others' viewpoints. When someone behaved poorly, the Stoic would try to understand what beliefs or pressures might have led to that behavior. Marcus Aurelius regularly reminded himself, when you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are like this because they can't tell good from bad. This wasn't cynicism, but recognition that others' behavior stems from their judgments and understanding. What makes these Stoic exercises particularly effective is how they work together as a coordinated system rather than isolated techniques. The morning preparation sets intentions that the evening reflection holds accountable. Written exercises reinforce cognitive practices. Physical training complements mental discipline. Each practice strengthens different aspects of virtue while reinforcing the others. Modern practitioners have adapted these ancient exercises to contemporary contexts while maintaining their essential purposes. Apps like Stoa and Daily Stoic provide structured approaches to Stoic practice. Communities like Modern Stoicism organize annual events like Stoic Week, where participants follow a curriculum of daily exercises. Books like How to be a Stoic by Massimo Pigliucci and Breakfast with Seneca by David Fideler offer accessible guides to integrating Stoic practices into modern life. Research suggests these practices genuinely work. Studies on gratitude practices, similar to Stoic appreciation exercises, negative visualization, and implementation intentions, similar to morning preparation, show measurable benefits for well-being, resilience, and behavioral change. While ancient Stoics couldn't conduct controlled studies, modern research largely validates their practical approach to character development. What differentiates Stoic exercises from some modern self-improvement techniques is their ethical foundation. These weren't practices aimed primarily at personal happiness or success, but at developing virtue, becoming a better person who contributes positively to the human community. The goal wasn't just feeling good, but living well in the fullest sense, manifesting wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance in daily actions. This systematic approach to character development complements theoretical understanding of Stoic principles. Knowledge alone doesn't transform character. Consistent practice does. As Epictetus told his students, if you didn't learn these things in order to demonstrate them in practice, what did you learn them for? The exercises provided the crucial bridge between philosophical understanding and lived virtue. The practical nature of these exercises makes Stoicism particularly accessible compared to some philosophical systems. You don't need specialized knowledge or exceptional intellectual abilities to begin practicing. Simple exercises like morning preparation, evening reflection, or voluntary discomfort can be implemented by anyone willing to make the effort, regardless of education or background. This practical accessibility may partly explain why Stoicism continues to attract interest today across diverse demographics. The accessibility of Stoic practices helps explain not just its current popularity, but also its profound historical influence. While we've been exploring Stoicism as a living philosophy with practical applications, it's worth recognizing that these ideas didn't exist in isolation or remain confined to ancient Greece and Rome. In fact, Stoicism has shaped Western philosophy, law, religion, and politics for over 2,000 years, often in ways that aren't immediately obvious. The fingerprints of Stoic thought can be found throughout the development of Western civilization, influencing everything from legal codes to religious doctrines to modern political systems. Have you ever wondered why we talk about natural rights or universal human dignity in modern political discourse? Or why certain moral principles are considered applicable across cultural boundaries? Many of these concepts can be traced back to Stoic ideas that were gradually incorporated into Western intellectual traditions. The Stoic emphasis on universal reason, natural law, and human equality provided foundational concepts that would shape centuries of subsequent thought. One of the earliest and most significant areas of Stoic influence was Roman jurisprudence, the legal theory and practice that would eventually form the basis for many modern legal systems. The concept of natural law, the idea that certain legal principles derive from nature itself rather than merely from custom or decree, came directly from Stoic philosophy. Roman legal thinkers like Cicero, heavily influenced by Stoicism, argued that true law must be in accordance with nature and therefore consistent with reason. This natural law concept had enormous practical consequences. It suggested that laws should be judged against universal standards of justice rather than merely reflecting the will of rulers or traditional practices. It implied that laws could be evaluated based on their rationality and alignment with natural principles. These ideas eventually made their way into later European legal thought, influencing everything from medieval canon law to modern international human rights frameworks. The influence of Stoicism on Christian theology represents another fascinating chapter in Western intellectual history. As Christianity developed during the Roman period, early Christian thinkers encountered Stoic ideas that were already widespread throughout the educated classes. Many church fathers, particularly those with classical education, incorporated modified Stoic concepts into Christian theological frameworks. Augustine of Hippo, one of the most influential early Christian theologians who lived from 354 to 430 CE, drew from Stoic ethics while adapting them to Christian purposes. His writings show clear engagement with Stoic ideas about virtue, providence, and the good life, even as he reinterpreted them within a distinctly Christian framework. Similarly, Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century incorporated elements of Stoic natural law theory into his theological system, creating a synthesis that would influence religious and legal thought for centuries. The Stoic emphasis on divine providence, the idea that the cosmos operates according to rational principles established by divine wisdom, found ready parallels in Christian concepts of God's sovereignty and plan. While the theological details differed significantly, the Stoic framework provided intellectual tools that Christian thinkers could adapt to articulate their own understanding of God's relationship to creation and human morality. During the Renaissance period of the 14th through 17th centuries, interest in classical learning revived throughout Europe, including renewed attention to Stoic philosophy. This wasn't merely academic curiosity. Renaissance thinkers actively sought to adapt ancient wisdom to address the challenges of their own era, particularly the religious and political conflicts that plagued Europe during this period. Justus Lipsius, a Flemish philosopher who lived from 1547 to 1606, played a particularly important role in this revival, developing what came to be known as Neo-Stoicism. This approach adapted Stoic ideas to Christian contexts, emphasizing themes of constancy in the face of adversity and acceptance of divine providence. Lipsius's work on constancy became highly influential, offering practical Stoic wisdom for navigating the turbulent religious and political landscape of the 16th century Europe. The Enlightenment of the 17th and 18th centuries represented another crucial period for Stoic influence on Western thought. The Stoic emphasis on universal reason as a shared human capacity contributed significantly to Enlightenment humanism and concepts of innate human dignity. Philosophers like Kant, while developing distinct philosophical systems, nevertheless engaged with and built upon Stoic ideas about rationality, duty, and the moral law within. The Stoic concept of cosmopolitanism, the idea that all humans belong to a single moral community by virtue of shared rationality, influenced Enlightenment thinkers like Kant, who developed similar ideas about universal human dignity and rights that transcend national boundaries. This universalizing tendency in Enlightenment thought, which underlies modern human rights frameworks, owes a significant debt to Stoic conceptions of human nature and natural law. The Stoic conception of personal liberty as self-governance rather than absence of external constraints also shaped important strands of Western political thought. For the Stoics, true freedom meant governing oneself according to reason rather than being enslaved to passions or impulses. This internalized conception of liberty influenced Republican political thinkers from Cicero through the American founding period. When American revolutionaries spoke of inalienable rights derived from nature and nature's God, they were drawing on intellectual traditions with clear Stoic ancestry. Thomas Jefferson, in particular, was well versed in Stoic thought and incorporated elements of it into his political writings. The Stoic emphasis on self-governance and rational control also informed early American conceptions of citizenship and virtue. The influence of Stoicism extended beyond formal philosophy and politics into literature and popular moral thought. Writers like Michel de Montaigne in the 16th century and Ralph Waldo Emerson in the 19th incorporated Stoic themes into essays that reached wide audiences. Through these literary channels, Stoic ideas about resilience, self-reliance, and virtue continued to shape Western cultural attitudes, even among those who never directly studied the ancient philosophy. During the 19th and early 20th centuries, as academic philosophy became more specialized and professionalized, direct engagement with Stoicism declined somewhat in formal philosophical circles. However, Stoic influences remained evident in various philosophical movements. Pragmatism, for instance, shared with Stoicism an emphasis on practical wisdom and the real-life consequences of philosophical ideas. Existentialism, while differing significantly from Stoicism in many respects, nevertheless engaged with similar questions about finding meaning and maintaining dignity in a challenging world. The late 20th century saw renewed academic interest in Stoicism, particularly in the fields of ethics and moral psychology. Philosophers like Lawrence Becker, Martha Nussbaum, and Julia Annas began re-examining Stoic ethics with fresh perspectives, finding valuable insights for contemporary moral theory. This academic revival paralleled growing popular interest in Stoicism as a practical philosophy for daily life. Tracing these intellectual genealogies reveals how Stoic concepts continue to operate within contemporary moral, political, and legal discourse, often in ways that participants themselves may not recognize. When we debate about universal human rights, discuss the proper limits of government power, or consider the meaning of true freedom, we're engaging with questions that Stoic thinkers helped frame centuries ago. In business and organizational contexts, Stoic influences appear in modern leadership philosophies that emphasize self-control, resilience, and focus on what one can control rather than external circumstances. Corporate training programs often incorporate elements that would be familiar to ancient Stoics: managing emotions effectively, maintaining perspective during challenges, and focusing on process rather than outcomes. While not always explicitly acknowledged, these approaches draw on the same psychological insights that Stoic philosophers articulated. Military organizations have also found value in Stoic principles throughout history. The emphasis on courage, discipline, and maintaining composure under pressure aligns naturally with military virtues. From Roman legions to modern special forces, military training often incorporates elements that parallel Stoic practices: enduring discomfort, focusing on duty rather than fear, and maintaining mental clarity in chaotic situations. The U.S. Navy's SERE, Survival, Evasion, Resistance, Escape, Training, explicitly incorporates Stoic techniques for maintaining mental resilience under extreme conditions. The influence of Stoicism on cognitive behavioral psychology, which we explored earlier, represents another significant channel through which Stoic ideas continue to shape contemporary thought. Through evidence-based therapeutic approaches, concepts with Stoic origins reach millions of people who may never read Seneca or Epictetus directly, but nevertheless benefit from their psychological insights. Environmental philosophy provides yet another area where Stoic ideas continue to find relevance. The Stoic emphasis on living in accordance with nature, while originally based on different assumptions than modern ecology, nevertheless offers valuable perspectives on human relationships with natural systems. Contemporary environmental thinkers sometimes draw on Stoic concepts of natural order, interconnection, and appropriate human conduct within natural systems to articulate sustainable approaches to environmental challenges. What makes this historical influence particularly interesting is how Stoic ideas have been continuously reinterpreted and adapted to different cultural contexts. Each era has found in Stoicism resources to address its particular challenges, from Roman imperial governance to Renaissance religious conflicts to modern psychological well-being. Rather than a static doctrine, Stoicism has functioned as a living tradition capable of evolution and reinterpretation while maintaining certain core insights about human nature and flourishing. This adaptability partly explains Stoicism's enduring relevance. Unlike philosophical systems tied to specific metaphysical claims that might become outdated as scientific understanding advances, Stoic practical wisdom about human psychology, virtue, and resilience has proven remarkably durable across different historical and cultural contexts. The core psychological insights, distinguishing between what we can and cannot control, examining our judgments rather than reacting automatically to impressions, developing virtuous character through practice, transcend particular historical circumstances. Understanding this historical influence enriches our appreciation of Stoicism not just as a personal philosophy, but as a significant cultural force that has helped shape Western civilization. When we engage with Stoic ideas today, we're participating in an intellectual tradition with deep historical roots and wide-ranging cultural impact. Even as we adapt ancient Stoic wisdom to contemporary challenges, we're continuing a process of creative reinterpretation that has been ongoing for more than 2,000 years. Despite this extensive historical influence and ongoing creative reinterpretation, Stoicism isn't without its critics or limitations. Any philosophy that has lasted over 2 millennia has naturally faced substantial challenges to its assumptions and applications. Just as we've explored Stoicism's enduring wisdom and practical value, it's equally important to consider thoughtful critiques that reveal potential blind spots or limitations in the Stoic approach. Taking these critiques seriously doesn't diminish Stoicism's value, but rather helps us engage with it more thoughtfully and adapt it more effectively to contemporary contexts. Have you ever encountered an idea that seemed powerful and helpful in many ways, but had certain aspects that didn't quite ring true or seemed problematic? Many people experience this with Stoicism, finding tremendous value in certain aspects while questioning others. This balanced appreciation, which acknowledges both strengths and limitations, often leads to the most fruitful engagement with any philosophical tradition. One significant area of critique focuses on Stoicism's metaphysical assumptions about providence and cosmic rationality. The ancient Stoics believed the universe operated according to divine reason or logos, with events unfolding according to a rational cosmic plan. This provided a foundation for their ethical teachings, the idea that accepting events means aligning oneself with this rational cosmic order. However, modern scientific understanding offers different explanations for natural phenomena, making the original Stoic cosmology difficult to maintain in its literal form. Martha Nussbaum, a prominent contemporary philosopher, has pointed out that many of Stoicism's practical insights don't actually require accepting its original metaphysical framework. We can value Stoic techniques for emotional regulation, focus on what we can control, and development of virtue without necessarily believing in a providentially ordered cosmos. Some modern practitioners adopt what's sometimes called a secular Stoicism, that preserves the psychological and ethical aspects while setting aside or reinterpreting the metaphysical claims. This raises interesting questions about how much of the original metaphysical framework can be removed while still maintaining an authentically Stoic approach. Are certain Stoic practices less compelling without the cosmic background that originally supported them? The acceptance of difficult events, for instance, might take on a different character without the belief that these events occur as part of a rational cosmic plan. Modern Stoics continue to debate these questions, with some arguing that updated metaphysical frameworks compatible with contemporary science can still support core Stoic insights. Feminist perspectives have raised another important set of questions about Stoic philosophy. Critics note that Stoic ideals of detachment and self-sufficiency might undervalue relational virtues and emotional intelligence traditionally associated with women in many cultures. The Stoic emphasis on emotional restraint and rational self-control could potentially devalue qualities like empathy, emotional expressiveness, and interdependence that feminist ethics often highlights as morally significant. Feminist philosopher Rosemary Tong has suggested that traditional Stoic virtues reflect a masculine bias, emphasizing independence and self-control at the expense of connection and care. While Stoics did value justice and appropriate concern for others, their framework may not fully account for the moral importance of relationships and emotional attunement that care ethics emphasizes. These different emphases aren't necessarily contradictory. Many modern practitioners find ways to integrate Stoic self-discipline with deeply caring relationships. But the tension raises important questions about potential blind spots in traditional Stoic ethics. The historical context of Stoicism also deserves critical examination. The philosophy was developed primarily by privileged men in ancient societies with pronounced social hierarchies, including slavery and limited rights for women. While Stoic principles of human dignity and universal reason were progressive for their time, the practical application of these principles remained limited by social context. This raises questions about how the social position of Stoicism's developers might have influenced which virtues they emphasized and how they conceptualized human flourishing. Another substantial critique involves what some see as Stoicism's potential for political quietism, accepting external circumstances rather than working to change unjust social conditions. If we focus primarily on controlling our own responses rather than changing external systems, might this lead to passive acceptance of injustices that should be actively contested? Critics worry that an overemphasis on personal virtue and emotional regulation could inadvertently support withdrawal from necessary political engagement or acceptance of oppressive systems. This critique isn't entirely fair to historical Stoicism, which did include active citizenship as part of the virtuous life. Marcus Aurelius, for instance, certainly didn't withdraw from governance responsibilities despite his Stoic commitment. Nevertheless, the emphasis on accepting what we cannot control raises legitimate questions about how to balance personal equanimity with appropriate outrage and action against injustice. Modern Stoic practitioners like Lawrence Becker have attempted to address this by developing accounts of Stoicism that more explicitly support social justice activism while maintaining core Stoic insights about focusing energy effectively. Psychologically, critics note that the original Stoic vision of emotional tranquility may establish unrealistic standards that create new forms of self-judgment when inevitably unmet. The Stoic sage, the ideal practitioner who has achieved perfect virtue and tranquility, represents a standard that even ancient Stoics acknowledged was rarely, if ever, achieved. Attempting to reach this ideal could potentially create perfectionism or self-criticism that undermines rather than supports well-being. Modern psychological research suggests that accepting and working with emotions rather than attempting to eliminate disturbing ones entirely often proves more effective for mental health. While sophisticated Stoic practice doesn't actually aim to eliminate emotions, but rather transform unhealthy ones into healthy alternatives. Popular understandings of Stoicism sometimes miss this nuance, leading to counterproductive suppression attempts rather than genuine emotional intelligence. Related concerns involve whether Stoicism adequately addresses trauma and mental health conditions with biological components. Can Stoic techniques of cognitive reframing adequately address the physiological aspects of trauma responses or conditions like clinical depression? Most contemporary practitioners would acknowledge that Stoicism works best as one component of a comprehensive approach to mental health that might also include appropriate medical treatment, therapy, and social support, rather than as a standalone solution for serious psychological conditions. The applicability of Stoicism across diverse human experiences raises additional questions. The original philosophy developed within specific cultural contexts that differ significantly from many contemporary settings. How well do Stoic approaches translate across different cultural backgrounds with varying values regarding emotional expression, social connection, and individual autonomy? The historical practice of Stoicism among primarily privileged men in Greco-Roman society also raises questions about whether the philosophy adequately addresses challenges faced by people in different social positions or with different lived experiences. For example, the Stoic emphasis on accepting external circumstances beyond our control might look different for someone facing systemic discrimination compared to someone experiencing random misfortune. The Stoic focus on internal freedom regardless of external constraints, while powerful in many contexts, might need nuanced application in situations of structural oppression, where external constraints systematically limit options in ways the ancient Stoics may not have fully considered. These various critiques don't invalidate Stoicism's valuable insights, but rather indicate areas where thoughtful adaptation and integration with other perspectives might strengthen contemporary practice. Engaging seriously with these critiques can help modern practitioners develop more nuanced approaches that preserve Stoicism's core wisdom while addressing potential blind spots in the traditional philosophy. Some contemporary Stoics have responded to these critiques by developing what might be called a progressive Stoicism that maintains core psychological insights while explicitly supporting social justice engagement, emotional intelligence, and recognition of structural factors that influence human flourishing. Others focus on integrating Stoic practices with complementary approaches that address different aspects of well-being, creating a more comprehensive framework than Stoicism alone provides. This process of critical engagement and creative adaptation continues the long tradition of reinterpreting Stoicism for new contexts that we traced through Western intellectual history. Just as Renaissance thinkers adapted Stoic ideas to address the challenges of their era, and Enlightenment philosophers incorporated Stoic concepts into new frameworks, contemporary practitioners continue to evolve Stoic philosophy to address modern questions and concerns. What's particularly valuable about these critiques is how they help clarify which aspects of Stoicism represent enduring psychological insights, and which might be more culturally or historically contingent. The core Stoic emphasis on distinguishing between what we can and cannot control, examining our judgments rather than reacting automatically to impressions, and developing virtue through consistent practice appears to translate well across diverse contexts. Other aspects, like specific metaphysical claims or particular applications of general principles, might require more substantial reinterpretation for contemporary relevance. For anyone exploring Stoicism today, awareness of these critiques and limitations can actually enhance rather than diminish the philosophy's value. By approaching Stoicism with both appreciation for its wisdom and awareness of potential blind spots, we can engage with it more thoughtfully, adapting its insights to our particular circumstances while supplementing it where necessary with complementary perspectives. This balanced approach recognizes that no single philosophical tradition, however valuable, provides a complete account of human flourishing or addresses all aspects of the good life equally well. By appreciating Stoicism's distinctive strengths while remaining open to insights from other traditions, we can develop more comprehensive approaches to life's challenges than any single philosophy provides on its own. The enduring appeal of Stoicism, despite these critiques, speaks to the fundamental value of its core insights. The distinction between what we can and cannot control, the recognition that our judgments shape our emotions, the emphasis on developing virtue through practice, and the focus on contributing positively to our communities remain powerful ideas with practical relevance across widely different contexts. These insights have survived centuries of critical scrutiny precisely because they capture something important about human psychology and ethics that transcends their original historical context. As you continue exploring Stoic philosophy, consider these critiques not as reasons to dismiss this ancient wisdom, but as invitations to engage with it more deeply and thoughtfully. The most valuable philosophical engagement often comes not from uncritical acceptance or wholesale rejection, but from thoughtful, nuanced appreciation that recognizes both strengths and limitations. By understanding both what Stoicism offers and where it might be productively supplemented or reinterpreted, you can draw maximum benefit from this remarkably durable philosophical tradition while avoiding potential pitfalls in its application.